She spilled coffee on the most dangerous man in New York. And the worst part? He smiled. That smile wasn't warmth. It wasn't forgiveness. It was the kind of smile that said, I already know everything about you, and you don't know a single thing about me. Serena Vale was 23 years old, broke, running late, and completely unprepared for the moment her entire life cracked open on a rain-slicked Manhattan sidewalk. One collision, one ruined suit, one man who should have walked away and didn't. This is the story of what happens when two worlds that were never supposed to touch collide so hard they can't pull apart. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Follow the channel so you don't miss a single part. Now let's go, because this is only the beginning. The rain had been falling since 4 in the morning. By 7:15, when Serena Vale burst out of the subway exit at 68th and Lexington, the sidewalks of Manhattan were the color of wet ash and the gutters were running fast enough to swallow a shoe. She knew this because she had already lost a shoe. Not literally, but the left sole of her canvas sneaker had been separating for 3 days, and the rain had finished the job. So every other step produced a soft, humiliating slap against the pavement that she could feel all the way up into her hip. She was carrying too much. She always carried too much. The canvas portfolio bag was slung across her back, and it was fat with mounted prints, 2 charcoal studies, and a sketchbook that had gotten wet at the corner and was already starting to warp. Her shoulder bag was digging into her collarbone. In her right hand, she carried a paper cup of coffee she'd bought from the cart on the corner of 67th because she hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, and she needed something in her system that wasn't anxiety. She had 8 minutes to get to the Harlow Institute of Art, 3 blocks north, present her mid-semester review portfolio to Professor Aldian, and not look like she'd been sleeping on a futon that smelled like turpentine and someone else's cat. She had been sleeping on exactly that futon. Her roommate Cass had gotten a boyfriend in October, and by November the boyfriend had effectively moved in without discussion, and now Serena spent most nights on the living room futon with a sheet pulled over her head, listening to the sounds of someone else's happiness through a thin wall. She hadn't complained. She didn't have the energy to complain. The scholarship covered tuition and a housing stipend that had been frozen at a rate established 6 years ago, which meant the stipend covered approximately 60% of her share of the rent in a city that had decided somewhere around 2019 that artists deserved to suffer more than everyone else. She had $211 in her checking account. She had not told anyone this. The rain accelerated. She tucked her chin down and moved faster, the portfolio banging against her spine. The coffee held out at an angle to keep from getting jostled. She was fast walking with the particular grim determination of someone who has decided that if she just keeps moving, reality cannot fully catch up with her. Past the dry cleaner, past the Korean deli, past the parking garage with the broken gate that had been broken for 4 months. She cut around a cluster of tourists who had stopped to argue over a map in the rain with the bewildered expressions of people who had not expected New York to be like this. And she was almost past them, almost clear, already calculating whether she could make the light at 69th. She came around the corner of the cafe at full speed. She felt the impact before she understood it. A solid wall of resistance, something immovable. And then the cup in her hand deformed under pressure, and the lid popped and the coffee went everywhere. Not some of it, not a splash. The entire contents of a 16-ounce dark roast exploded outward in a perfect arc, and landed directly across the front of a black suit. Serena stumbled. Her portfolio bag swung wide. Her shoulder bag slipped. She grabbed the doorframe of the cafe to keep from going down and looked up. The man was tall. That was the first thing she registered. Not his face, not the suit, but the sheer fact of his height and the way he filled the space in front of her as though he had been placed there deliberately. He was standing just outside the cafe entrance under the narrow awning, one hand loosely holding a phone, completely still in a way that felt almost unnatural, like a man who had trained himself never to flinch. The coffee was running down the front of his jacket in dark rivulets. Serena's mouth opened. No sound came out. The suit was black. Bespoke, she could tell even through the rain and the panic. The kind of suit that wasn't bought off a rack anywhere. The kind that was measured twice and cut by someone who cared about every seam. And now it had a spreading dark stain across the chest and lapel that looked disturbingly like a wound. "Oh my God," she finally said. "I am so sorry. The rain. I wasn't looking." She was already reaching into her bag for something, anything, finding only a crumpled receipt and a pen and a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a grocery list from 3 weeks ago. She held these out uselessly and then realized what she was doing and shoved them back. The man looked down at his jacket. Then he looked at her. His eyes were dark. Not brown, she would think later, but a shade between brown and black that made it difficult to tell where the iris ended. His face was the kind of face that had been interesting rather than beautiful, all angles and structure, with a jaw that suggested stubbornness and eyes that suggested something older and more complicated. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, maybe 36, maybe older. He had that quality of men who had stopped aging in a conventional sense and simply become more themselves. He was not smiling. He was not furious either. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. Calm. Still. Alert in a way that felt faintly predatory, like he was gathering information rather than reacting to it. "It's fine," he said. His voice was low. Not soft. Low. The kind of low that meant he was accustomed to rooms going quiet when he spoke. "It is absolutely not fine," Serena said, and her voice came out sharper than she intended, the way it always did when she was mortified. That suit is obviously... Look, I'll pay for the dry cleaning. I don't have a card on me, but I can give you my number, and you don't need to give me your number. I didn't mean it like that. I meant for the cleaning bill. I'm saying I'll cover it. It's a suit," he said. "It'll clean." Something scattered across the wet sidewalk. Serena looked down and realized her portfolio bag had come unlatched in the collision, and 3 of her mounted prints had slid halfway out and were now picking up water from the pavement. She made a sound that was very close to a curse and dropped into a crouch, grabbing for them. The man crouched too. She looked up sharply. He was already picking up the nearest print, a charcoal study, large format, a figure study she'd done in her second year, and he was holding it carefully at the edges the way someone handles something they recognize as fragile. "I've got it," she said. "I can see that." He handed her the print anyway, unhurried, studying it for just a moment before he let it go. Something moved across his face. Not quite appreciation, more like recognition. She shoved the prints back into the portfolio, snapped the latch, and straightened up. He was already standing. The coffee stain was still there, dark against the black wool, and she felt a renewed wave of horror at it. "Seriously," she said, "I'm sorry. I was running late and I wasn't paying attention, and—" "Are you a student?" he asked. The question stopped her. "What?" He nodded toward the portfolio. "The art." "Yes, Harlow. I have a review in—" She checked her phone and her stomach dropped. 6 minutes, which is why I was running. "Then you should go." She stared at him. There was something off about the interaction. Not threatening, just wrong, in a way she couldn't locate. Men in suits like that, standing outside cafes in the rain in Manhattan, did not generally crouch on wet sidewalks to pick up someone else's artwork. They did not speak with that kind of measured patience. They did not watch her with that expression she still hadn't been able to name. "The cleaning bill," she started again. "Forget it." "I'm not going to forget it. I ruined your—" "What's your name?" he asked. Another stop. "Why?" The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. "Because you're arguing with me on a rainy sidewalk when you have 5 minutes to get somewhere, and I'm curious about someone who argues when she should be running." Serena opened her mouth, closed it. "Serena," she said. "Vale. Dante Moretti." He said it the way people say their name when they're used to it landing. He wasn't arrogant about it. There was no performance in it. He just said it and watched her face. She didn't recognize it. She would learn later that this had never happened to him before. "I really am sorry about the suit, Mr. Moretti," she said, and then she turned and ran. She made the review with 90 seconds to spare, wet and breathing hard, her hair plastered against her forehead and her canvas sneakers slapping with every step. Professor Aldean looked at her the way he always looked at her, with the particular exhaustion of a man who has stopped expecting punctuality from talent and simply learned to be grateful when they arrived at all. She presented the portfolio. She talked about the figure studies and the conceptual framing and the shift in her approach to negative space that she'd been working on since November. Her hands were steady, her voice was steadier. She did not think about Dante Moretti until she was on the subway home. Then she thought about almost nothing else. His name hit her 3 days later. She was in the library, killing time between classes, half reading an article on her phone about a real estate development controversy in Lower Manhattan. Some battle over a landmark building that had been purchased and was being converted into luxury residential, displacing a community arts nonprofit that had been there for 30 years. The article mentioned investors. It mentioned lawyers. It mentioned, in passing, the name of the holding company behind the acquisition, Moretti Capital Group. She scrolled down and there was a photograph. Business section, the kind of stiff formal shot that didn't capture much. But it was him. The same face, the same stillness, even in a photograph. The caption identified him as Dante Moretti, 37, founder and principal of Moretti Capital, described as one of the most influential private investment figures in the northeastern United States. She read the article twice. Then she searched his name. What came up was carefully managed. She could tell that even without understanding how. The public record was there. The investment firm, the legitimate holdings, the charitable donations, the occasional appearance at a gala or an industry event. He had a Wikipedia page that was largely about his business empire and said almost nothing about his personal life. He had been engaged briefly 5 years ago to a woman named Vivian Cross, socialite and philanthropist, now apparently a prominent figure in New York's charity circuit. But there were other things that were harder to find and impossible to confirm. Forum discussions, the kind of half-sourced speculation that lived in comment sections and never quite coalesced into anything printable. Words like connected and untouchable, and the kind of money that doesn't come from spreadsheets. Serena closed her phone. She sat in the library for a long time, looking at nothing. Then she went back to the reading she was supposed to be doing and told herself that she had imagined the whole interaction meaning something. He was a wealthy man who had been mildly inconvenienced and had been gracious about it. That was all. People were occasionally gracious. That was not a story. She believed this for approximately 4 more days. He kicked. The second time she saw him, she was working. Friday nights, Serena worked at a place called Callaway's, a wine bar in the West Village that was trying to occupy the precise midpoint between approachable and expensive, with exposed brick and a rotating selection of local art on the walls, which was how she had originally gotten the job. She'd walked in to ask if they'd consider showing her work, and the manager, a pragmatic woman named Doris, had offered her a service position instead and told her the art wall paid in exposure, which everyone knew meant it paid nothing. She had taken both. The bar was full on Fridays. She was 3 hours into a shift, her feet already aching, navigating the narrow space between tables with a tray of wine glasses when she looked up and saw him. He was at the corner table. The corner table at Callaway's was the one everyone wanted and almost no one got. It was set back from the main floor with a partial wall providing a degree of privacy, and Doris reserved it for people who had relationships with the establishment or tipped at a rate that suggested they understood the value of privacy. Dante Moretti was seated there with a man Serena didn't recognize, older, heavy-set, with the studied casualness of someone in expensive clothes that were meant to look ordinary. They were talking. The older man was doing most of the talking. Dante was listening in that way he had, still, focused, giving nothing. Serena made herself look away. She delivered the wine glasses. She took an order from the table by the window. She went back to the bar and she did not look at the corner table, and she had a small, stern internal conversation with herself about the nature of coincidence in a city of 8 million people and the statistical reality that running into someone twice in a week in New York was not a sign of anything except density. "Table 9 needs the check," Doris said, appearing beside her. "On it." She was on her way back from table 9 when she passed close enough to the corner table that she couldn't avoid it. She was looking at the floor, concentrating on not sloshing the glass of water she was carrying, and she was almost past when he spoke. "Serena Vale." She stopped. He was looking at her across the table. The conversation with the older man apparently paused. His expression was unreadable in the low light of the bar, but his eyes were doing that same thing, gathering. "Mr. Moretti," she said. She kept her voice even. "Your suit looks like it survived. Dry cleaning is a reliable industry." He paused. "Do you work here?" 3 nights a week. "Do you like it?" The question was strange, not offensive, just unexpected, the way his questions kept being unexpected. It pays, she said. He nodded slowly, as though she'd said something more complex. The older man across from him was watching her now, too, with an expression that was less interested and more assessing. She felt the weight of it and didn't like it. "Enjoy your evening," she said, and moved away. She was at the bar, hands around a cold glass, when Doris appeared at her elbow. "Do you know who that is?" Doris asked quietly, not looking at her. "He came in. The man at 9, Doris said. "The one who just talked to you." "Moretti Capital, yes." Doris looked at her for a moment. "That's the polite version of who he is, sweetheart." Serena met her eyes. "Be careful," Doris said, and went back to her side of the bar. He left a card. Not for her. Or maybe for her. She found it when she cleared the corner table at the end of the night. A plain card, heavy stock, the kind that cost more per sheet than her coffee. Just a name and a number and nothing else. It was lying on top of the bill, which had been settled in cash, and it was turned face up in a way that suggested it had been left deliberately. Serena picked it up. She turned it over, blank on the back. She put it in her apron pocket and carried it home on the subway, and stood in the kitchen of her apartment at 1:15 in the morning and looked at it under the fluorescent light. She didn't call the number. She put the card in the drawer under the kitchen counter where she kept takeout menus and rubber bands and a flashlight that needed batteries, and she went to sleep. She dreamed about charcoal and rain. But she called on a Tuesday, not because she'd decided to, not because she'd thought it through and reached a conclusion. She called because it was Tuesday afternoon and she had just come from a meeting with the scholarship office at the Harlow Institute, and the woman behind the desk had told her, with professional regret and a voice as flat as a complaint form, that the criteria for renewal had been updated and that based on her current academic standing, not failing, not even close, but apparently not excellent enough for a committee that had revised its benchmarks mid-year without telling anyone, her scholarship was under review. Under review meant at risk. At risk meant possibly gone. Gone meant she couldn't afford the spring semester. She sat on a bench outside the Harlow Institute in the cold, and she held her phone and she stared at the bare tree across the street for a very long time. Then she went to the drawer with the takeout menus and the dead flashlight. "I didn't expect to hear from you," he said when he picked up. He'd answered on the second ring. His voice was the same, low, unhurried, like he had nowhere to be. "I'm not sure why I called," she said. It came out blunt. She hadn't decided to be blunt, but she couldn't find the energy to be anything else. A pause. "Are you all right?" "I've had a bad day." "What kind of bad?" "The kind where someone changes the rules after you've already been playing by them." She stopped. "I don't know why I told you that." "Because it's true," he said. "Where are you?" "Outside my school." "Are you hungry?" The question was so ordinary that she laughed, a short, involuntary sound. "That's a strange response to what I just said. You said you had a bad day. Bad days usually benefit from eating. I know a place 3 blocks from the Harlow Institute that has good food and very bad lighting, and they won't bother us." Us. She noticed the word. "This is a terrible idea," she said. "Probably," he agreed. He didn't try to argue against it. She stood up from the bench. "Give me the address." The restaurant was called Maro's, and it was exactly as described, a basement-level Italian place with lighting that seemed philosophically opposed to visibility, crowded tables, and the kind of noise level that made private conversation easy. They were seated in a corner booth without ceremony. Nobody looked at him. Nobody came over to shake hands or hover. Either he came here often enough that his presence had become unremarkable, or the staff understood something about his preference for being left alone. Serena ordered pasta. He ordered almost nothing, just a glass of water and the bread that came automatically with the table. She noticed but didn't comment. "Tell me about the scholarship," he said. "Why?" "Because you're sitting here instead of somewhere else, and I think you need to say it out loud to someone." She looked at him across the table. In the dim light, he looked less like a photograph and more like a person. There were lines at the corners of his eyes she hadn't noticed before, and a faint tension in his jaw that suggested he was either always thinking about something or perpetually braced for something. Both, she suspected. "The Institute changed the renewal criteria mid-year," she said. "GPA threshold went up. They didn't announce it. I found out today that I'm under review, which means I might lose the scholarship at the end of the semester. Can you appeal it? I can fill out a form. She picked up her fork and put it back down. But the honest answer is, I'm not sure I meet the new criteria. She stopped. You've been what? Distracted, she said. It came out like a confession. This year has been harder than I expected. I've been working 3 nights a week to cover rent, and the work I've been turning in has been good. I know it's been good. My advisor knows it's been good. But good doesn't matter to a committee that's looking at a number. What happens if you lose it? I can't afford spring semester without it. He was quiet for a moment. And then what? I don't know. She said it simply, without drama. I come from a family in Providence that doesn't have money for this. I got here on my own, and I've stayed here on my own, and if the scholarship goes, I'd have to figure something out, take a leave, maybe not come back. She picked up her water glass. I'm telling you this, and I don't know why. I don't talk about this. Why not? Because it sounds like defeat, and I'm not willing to be defeated yet. Her voice had an edge in it now, not toward him, just the natural sharpness that came when she got close to something that frightened her. I'm telling you because you asked, and you seemed like you actually wanted to know rather than just being polite. And I'm bad at being talked to politely. Something shifted in his expression, subtle, like a door opening a fraction. I know what that's like, he said. She looked at him. What? Being bad at polite conversation, or being afraid of losing something you built? Both, he said. More the second one. The pasta arrived. She ate. He watched her eat with the unselfconscious attention of someone who was comfortable with silence, which made the silence feel different than silence usually felt. Not empty, but occupied. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. What is it that you actually do? He was quiet for just a moment. Not evasive, she thought, but choosing. I run a holding company. Real estate, logistics, some private equity. Legitimate business, he said. And the slight pause before legitimate was so brief she almost missed it. And the other kind? She asked. His eyes didn't move. What other kind? The kind that makes people at wine bars tell me to be careful when I talk to you. Another pause. He looked at her the way she'd come to expect, directly, without deflection, but with layers she couldn't read. There are people in this city who believe I'm involved in things I'm not prepared to confirm or deny, he said. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong. None of it touches the people I care about. And what if it did? It won't, he said. Flat, certain, the kind of certain that doesn't leave room for negotiation. That sounds like something everyone says before it does, she said. Maybe. He didn't argue. But I'm careful. Careful is relative. Yes, he said. It is. She ate the rest of her pasta in the warm, noisy dark of Maro's, and she thought about careful and relative and the particular quality of his attention, which was like nothing she'd encountered. Not romantic performance, not the practiced charm of men who were used to getting things, but something more fundamental. He was paying attention to her the way you pay attention to something that has surprised you and that you're still trying to understand. He walked her to the subway at the end of the evening. The rain had stopped. The streets were clean and cold, and the city looked for a moment like it was trying. At the top of the stairs, she turned to face him. Thank you for dinner. Thank you for calling, he said. She waited, half expecting something she couldn't name. A move, a push, a reveal of motive. He did nothing except look at her with that still particular focus. I'm not sure what this is, she said. The honesty surprised her coming out, but it was too late to call it back. Neither am I, he said, but I'd like to find out. She went down the stairs. She did not look back, but she heard him standing there until she turned the corner. They had dinner again the following week, and the week after that. It was never elaborate. He didn't take her to places designed to impress. She got the sense he understood, without being told, that she would have found that alienating. Instead, it was the kind of New York that existed beneath the surface of the Manhattan that got photographed. A ramen place in the East Village that had been run by the same family for 20 years and where the chef came out personally when Dante arrived. A A jazz club below a dry cleaner on 10th Street with no sign and no internet presence, and a bassist who played with his eyes closed like he was asleep. A walk along the elevated rail garden at midnight, when the cold had emptied it and the lights of the city came through the dead winter plants like something from a film. She brought her sketchbook on the third walk. Not to show him, she just brought it, habit, the way she brought it everywhere. He didn't ask about it. Midway through the walk, she sat on a bench and started drawing without thinking, and he sat beside her and watched the city and said nothing. And she did a quick study of his profile without meaning to, and then looked at what she'd drawn and felt something strange move through her. She knew how to draw from observation. She'd been trained to look without editorializing. But the study she'd done of him in 5 minutes was different from her usual work. Looser, more responsive, the lines not defined but reaching. Like the paper had been trying to say something about him that she couldn't articulate directly. She closed the sketchbook. "You draw fast," he said. He'd been watching. Habit, observation. She kept her voice neutral. "You have a good face for it." "Meaning what?" "Meaning there's structure, planes." She paused. "Shadows in the right places." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to say my face looked like bad news." She laughed. A real one, sudden. "That's not an insult." "No," he said. She meant it as a compliment. He didn't talk about his family often. She'd learned to notice when a reference slipped through. The mother once, the father in a way that carried weight she hadn't pressed on, the organization that was never named directly but was always present, lurking at the edges of what he said and didn't say. She was not naive about what she was moving toward. She had done more reading. She understood now, or understood in outline, the nature of what Moretti Capital was and was not. The way the name opened doors in New York that no amount of legitimate money could open. The kind of deference she'd seen at Morrow's and at every other place they'd gone. The slight straightening of spines, the careful neutrality of eyes that recognized him. She was not naive, but she also wasn't afraid, and she couldn't entirely explain why. "Tell me something true," she said one evening in the jazz club, the music low and steady behind them. He considered this. "I haven't sat still this long without thinking about work in 4 years," he said. She looked at him. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." "You haven't asked me anything about my family," she said. "I know you're from Providence. I know you came here on your own. I know the scholarship situation is still unresolved." He paused. "I didn't ask because you'll tell me when you want to." "Most people ask," she said. "Background check by conversation." "I'm not most people. I'm aware." She turned her wine glass slowly. "My father left when I was 11. My mother worked 2 jobs my entire childhood and never once complained about it, which is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed because I don't have her capacity for silence. I have a younger brother named Marco who is considerably more well-adjusted than me and works in construction in Providence and doesn't understand why I came here." She looked up. "Now you." A pause. The bassist played something that wandered. "My father runs the organization," Dante said. "Has for 30 years. I was never given a choice about whether I was part of it. It was assumed. I built the legitimate side because I needed something that was mine and not inherited." He looked at the glass in his hands. "The 2 sides don't separate cleanly. They never have. I've made peace with that in most ways, and not at all in others." "The engagement," she said carefully. "Vivian Cross." His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did. "That was arranged," he said, "by our families, by the organization. It made political sense." "Did it make any other kind of sense?" "No," he said, simply, no pause to consider. "What happened?" "I ended it." Another pause. She didn't forgive that easily. Serena nodded slowly. The music moved around them like weather. "I should tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "I've never been good at being careful." She met his eyes across the table. "When I want something, I'm bad at being measured about it." His expression shifted. Something unfamiliar there, something unguarded. "What do you want?" The question hung in the air. The bassist closed his eyes and played something that climbed. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I'm less afraid of finding out than I was 3 weeks ago." He held her gaze. Outside, the city moved through the cold in its endless, indifferent way, carrying its money and its secrets and its violence, beneath a surface that looked, if you didn't know better, like just a city. "Then don't be careful," he said quietly. She exhaled, nodded once. It was the closest either of them had come to saying what this actually was. Neither of them reached for more than that. Not tonight, not with the jazz playing and the wine half finished and the particular fragility of something new that isn't sure yet if it can hold weight. But on the subway home, when her phone buzzed with a message from the scholarship office asking her to attend a meeting the following Monday, she felt the ground shift beneath her in a way that had nothing to do with the train. The meeting was described as a courtesy notification. She had learned enough about institutional language to know that courtesy notification meant the decision had already been made. She was going to lose the scholarship, and for the first time in years, the thought of losing it was tangled up with something she hadn't planned for. The terrifying realization that Dante Moretti had resources that could solve this problem with a phone call, and that if she let herself want that, if she let herself lean even slightly in that direction, she would become exactly what she had always refused to be: dependent, rescued, owned. She stared at the screen until the subway went underground and the message disappeared in the dark. The train kept moving north. The problem kept moving with it. And somewhere in the city behind her, a man sat alone at a corner table in a jazz club long after she had left, looking at something she didn't know about. A photograph on his phone, forwarded by a number he recognized, showing the two of them on the elevated walkway from 3 nights ago. Clear, deliberate, a message that didn't need words. Someone had been watching. Someone wanted him to know it. The photograph was taken from a distance, but it wasn't amateur work. Dante knew the difference. He'd seen enough surveillance photography in his life to recognize when someone was being professional about it. The angle, the focal length, the fact that neither he nor Serena was looking toward the camera. It had been shot from the building across from the elevated walkway, probably a second-floor window, probably with a long lens. Clean, deliberate, patient. The number that sent it was a burner. He knew that before he tried to trace it, but he tried anyway, and Marcus, who handled things like this with the efficiency of someone who had been handling things like this for 15 years, confirmed it within the hour. Prepaid. Purchased in cash from a convenience store in Midtown 6 weeks ago. Already dead. 6 weeks ago. That meant whoever it was had been planning this since before Dante had done anything worth photographing. Since before he and Serena had become visible in any way that mattered. He sat in the back office of his building on West 54th for a long time after Marcus left, the photograph still open on his phone, and he thought about timing and intent and the particular vocabulary of this kind of message. It wasn't a threat. There was no demand attached. It was a reminder. A tap on the shoulder that said, "I see you, and I see what you're choosing, and you should think carefully about that." He knew who spoke that language. He'd known her for 12 years. Bob. Vivian Cross had an apartment on the Upper East Side that she'd bought herself. She was always clear about that, always precise. With money she'd made through her own connections, her own cultivated relationships with the kind of wealthy philanthropists who treated charity as a social currency. The apartment was beautiful in the way that everything Vivian touched was beautiful, controlled, expensive, without a single object out of place. She collected art, but only art that had already been validated. She never bought anything she couldn't explain the value of to someone else. Dante arrived without calling. The doorman, who had worked the building for years and knew Dante's face from a period when his visits had been routine, called up anyway, because that was his job. By the time Dante reached the 14th floor, the apartment door was open and Vivian was standing in the frame with a glass of white wine and an expression of perfect composure that had taken her years to construct. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and dark trousers, and her hair was up, and she looked exactly like herself, which was the problem with Vivian. She always looked exactly like herself, never caught off balance, never unguarded, even when she was both of those things underneath. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. "The photo," he said. She stepped back from the door. Not an invitation, just a movement that created space. He walked in anyway. The apartment was warm and quiet. Classical music, low, a half-eaten meal on the kitchen counter that she'd clearly abandoned when he arrived. "Sit down, Dante." "I'd rather not." She took a slow sip of wine. Her eyes were steady. "You're angry." "I'm asking you a direct question." "You haven't asked it yet." Did you send me that photograph? The pause was less than a second. In anyone else, it wouldn't have meant anything. In Vivian, who was precise about everything, including her own reactions, it meant everything. Someone's concerned about you, she said. That isn't cruelty. That's care. That's surveillance. That's attention. She moved to the window carrying her wine, looking out at the street below. You've been seen with her 4 times in 3 weeks. People talk, Dante. Your father's people talk. Damien's people talk. In this world, what you're seen doing is what you're doing. And right now, what you're seen doing is walking around Manhattan with a 23-year-old art student who doesn't know what she's standing next to. She knows enough. Vivienne turned. Does she? Her voice was level, not cruel, which was somehow worse. Does she know about the Renault matter? Does she know what happened in 2021? Does she know what your father had to do last March to keep the Montreal connection intact? She let the silence sit. Or does she just know that you're interesting and a little dangerous, and that's romantic to someone her age? Dante's jaw tightened. You don't know her. I know what she is, Vivienne said. She's someone who got close to you by accident, and now she's staying close because you're the most compelling thing that's ever happened to her. And that's not the same as knowing you. That's not the same as being able to survive knowing you. That's not your decision. No, she agreed, but your father will make it one. She turned back to the window. He's heard. He'll want to meet her. And when that meeting happens, and it will happen, Dante, you know it will, that girl is going to be sitting across from a man who will evaluate her like a liability, and he will find one, and you will have put her there. The room was quiet except for the music and the distant sound of traffic 14 floors below. Was it you or Damien? Dante asked. Vivienne looked at her glass. Does it matter? It matters to me. Another pause. I suggested it, she said, with the precision of someone choosing their words like surgical instruments. Damien provided the resource. We both thought you should be reminded of what visibility costs. Dante looked at her for a long moment. There were 12 years of history in the room with them. Not love, not exactly, but something that had been built and taken apart and left in pieces that neither of them had entirely disposed of. He knew her. She knew him. That kind of knowledge had its own weight, and tonight he felt every pound of it. If anything touches her, he said quietly, anything at all. Dante, that's the only thing I'm going to say about it. He left. She stood at the window a long time after, finishing the wine, watching the street below with the expression of someone watching something approach that they have decided they cannot stop. Serena's meeting at the scholarship office was on a Monday at 10. The woman behind the desk was named Patricia Howe, Administrative Director of Student Financial Support, and she had the manner of someone who delivered difficult news regularly enough that she'd developed a professional distance from its impact. She was not unkind. She was efficient, which in context felt like the same thing. The scholarship was under formal review. The new criteria, GPA of 3.7 or above, academic distinction in 2 or more evaluated categories, had been established in September. Serena's GPA was 3.4. Her portfolio evaluations were strong, Howe acknowledged, but the new criteria weighted academic grades equally with portfolio performance, and Serena's grades in the theoretical coursework, art history, critical theory, the lecture series, were pulling the number down. The review period ends December 15th, Howe said. If your academic standing improves significantly before then, the committee will reconsider. It's November 22nd, Serena said. Yes, Howe agreed. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to raise a GPA that had been slowly eroded by 18 months of working nights and stretching every dollar and submitting papers at 11:59 on deadlines that she'd met by sitting on the floor of the bathroom at the apartment, because that was the only room where the light didn't bother Cass's boyfriend when he was trying to sleep. She walked out of the scholarship office and stood in the hallway and breathed. Then she took out her phone and looked at Dante's name in her contacts and did not call him. She walked to class instead. He texted that evening, dinner? And then, after a pause, or not, up to you. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. The problem was that she knew now what he could do with a phone call. She had not been naive enough to avoid thinking about it. The way a word from him to the right person could make the scholarship situation evaporate, could make Patricia Howe's efficient manner redirect itself toward a different outcome. She was not naive enough to pretend the option didn't exist. She was also not naive enough to pretend it wouldn't cost her something irreplaceable. "Can we talk?" she wrote back. He came to the apartment. She'd asked him to, partly because she didn't have the energy for a restaurant, partly because she needed him on her territory for once, such as it was. He arrived at 8 with 2 paper bags from the Thai place on Columbus and said nothing about the futon in the living room, or the turpentine smell, or the prints tacked to every wall with blue painter's tape. He looked at the prints for a long moment while she cleared space on the kitchen table. "These are new," he said. "This week." She didn't look up. "Sit down." He sat. She served the food out of the containers and they ate for a while without talking, which had become one of the comfortable things between them. The silence that didn't demand to be filled. Then she put her fork down. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without offering to fix it." He looked at her steadily. "All right. The scholarship is almost certainly gone. I have 3 weeks and the math doesn't work." She folded her hands on the table. "I'm telling you because you're going to find out anyway, and I'd rather tell you myself. And I'm telling you explicitly that I don't want you to do anything about it." He was quiet. "I mean that," she said. "I'm not being modest. I'm not performing independence for the sake of it. I'm telling you that if you make a call or move money or say a name to the right person, whatever this is," she gestured between them, "becomes something I can't live inside of. You understand?" His jaw moved, not quite tension, just the shift of someone absorbing something they don't like. "Yes," he said. "You're not going to argue?" "You told me not to fix it. I'm not going to fix it, Dante." "I'm not going to fix it," he repeated, and his voice was even, but something underneath it wasn't. "But I want to be clear that watching you deal with a problem I could address without blinking is going to be difficult for me." "I know," she said. "That's why I told you, because I need you to know it's difficult and do nothing anyway." He looked at her across the table. The apartment was small and warm, and the prints on the walls made the room feel like the inside of her head, which it basically was. And for a moment he looked like something she hadn't seen on his face before. Not confused, not uncertain, but something adjacent to both. Like a man looking at a map of a place that doesn't follow the rules he's navigated by his entire life. "You're the strangest person I've met in a long time," he said. "Good or bad?" "Neither," he said. "Just true." They finished dinner. He stayed until midnight, sitting on the floor against the kitchen cabinets while she worked at the table, a paper she had to finish for critical theory, which she was bad at and knew it, the academic vocabulary never quite fitting her way of thinking. She wrote and crossed out, and he didn't talk, just sat there with his phone occasionally and once fell asleep for 20 minutes against the cabinet door, which she only noticed when she heard his breathing change. She looked at him sleeping against her kitchen cabinet at 11:40 at night in his expensive coat and thought, with the particular clarity that comes from exhaustion and proximity, "I am in serious trouble." She went back to the paper. Well, the gala was Cass's idea. Cass's boyfriend knew someone at a gallery in Chelsea that was hosting a fundraiser for arts education. A legitimate event, mid-range ticket price, the kind of thing that attracted local artists and educators and a stratum of donor society that was aspirational rather than elite. Cass thought it would be good for Serena's networking. Cass also, Serena suspected, wanted the apartment to herself for the evening, and this was a generous way of engineering that. Serena went. She wore the one good dress she owned, a dark green thing she'd bought at a second-hand store, and altered herself. And she took the subway and arrived at the Chelsea Gallery feeling the particular combination of genuine excitement and low-grade social dread that accompanied most situations involving other people. The gallery was full. Good art on the walls. Not the gallery's permanent collection, but work by local artists, some of them students, the kind of show that was more statement than commercial. She moved through it with a glass of cheap wine and looked at everything and let the work do what good work did, which was make the noise in her head quiet. She didn't know Vivian Cross on sight. She learned the name afterward. In the moment, she knew only that the woman who approached her near the east wall was striking, tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of composed beauty that required significant maintenance and made that maintenance invisible. She had champagne, and she was looking at the same piece Serena had been looking at, and she introduced herself with a warmth that felt completely natural. "You're Serena Vale," she said. Something tightened in Serena's chest. Yes, I've admired your work. Someone showed me photographs of your figure studies recently. She paused. I'm Vivian Cross. I don't think we've been formally introduced. The name landed like cold water. Serena kept her face still with effort. No, she said. We haven't. Vivian looked at the painting on the wall, a large abstract in blues and grays that was technically accomplished and emotionally empty in a way Serena had been trying to articulate to herself. It's difficult, Vivian said pleasantly, making real work in this city. The costs are significant, not just financial. She turned to look at Serena directly. I imagine you know that. I do, Serena said. The Institute has been struggling with its scholarship programs. Budget issues, criteria drift. These things happen. She took a sip of champagne. Her eyes were calm and measuring. It would be a shame to lose someone genuinely talented to bureaucratic confusion. Serena felt the shape of the conversation with sudden clarity. What are you doing? She asked. She kept her voice level. Vivian's expression didn't waver. Talking about art and institutional funding. No, you're not. A slight pause. Then something shifted in Vivian's composure. Not breaking, just revealing a layer beneath the warmth, like a window on a cold day going from fog to clear. You're perceptive, she said. He always had good instincts about people, even when those instincts weren't good for him. Say what you came to say, Serena said. Vivian looked at her for a long moment. Around them, the gala moved and murmured, oblivious. You're in a situation you don't fully understand, she said, her voice quieter now, more direct. The man you're involved with is not just a businessman with complicated investments. The world around him has gravity, and if you stay close enough long enough, that gravity will pull at everything in your life until you can't remember what was yours to begin with. She paused. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because I have been exactly where you are, and I know what the end of that road looks like. You chose to stay, Serena said. I know the history. Something moved through Vivian's eyes. Quickly, gone, before it could be named. I chose correctly, she said. And then I was unchosen. There's a difference. The room felt smaller. Serena made herself breathe. He'll discard you, Vivian said, and her voice had a precision to it that made it worse than cruelty. Not out of malice, out of inevitability. You are a moment in his life. I know what those moments look like from the other side. She stepped back slightly, reassembling the warmth like a garment. Think about what you want your life to look like in 3 years. Then ask yourself whether the path you're on leads there. She moved away into the crowd with the smooth unhurriedness of someone who has delivered the thing they came to deliver and has no interest in the aftermath. Serena stood in front of the empty blue painting and drank the rest of her wine. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. She had expected to feel shaken, and she did. But underneath the shake was something harder, something that had been forming for weeks without her noticing, built out of every moment of deciding and choosing and refusing the easy version of things. She was angry, not at Vivian, or not only at Vivian, at the whole shape of it, the photograph, the managed meeting, the words calibrated to find every insecurity she actually had about this situation and press on them precisely, at the fact that it had almost worked, at the fact that the worst part of what Vivian said was not the cruelty but the truth woven through it, the genuine possibility that Serena couldn't separate from the manipulation. She left the gala without speaking to anyone else. On the sidewalk, she stood in the cold and called Dante. "Where are you?" she asked when he answered. "Work. What's wrong?" "I just met Vivian Cross." Silence. A beat too long. "Where?" "A gala in Chelsea. She knew my name. She knew about the scholarship." Her voice was even, but her breath wasn't. She was very composed and very deliberate, and she told me you'd discard me eventually and that I should think carefully about my future. The silence from his end was different now. Not surprised, but controlled. She could hear him breathing. "Are you home?" "Not yet." "Go home. I'll come." "Dante, go home," he said again, and the low steadiness in his voice had an edge underneath it. "Please." She went home. She changed out of the green dress and sat on the futon and waited. He arrived 40 minutes later. She had no idea what he'd been doing or where he'd actually been, and she realized in that moment that she still didn't have full access to the geography of his life. There were rooms she hadn't been shown and might never be shown, and she'd been choosing not to push on that because pushing felt like demanding more than she'd been offered. He sat across from her, looked at her face. "Are you all right?" "Tell me something," she said. "Yes. Is there any version of this, of us, that doesn't eventually require me to give up the things that are mine? My work, my independence, my ability to fail on my own terms without someone managing it?" He held her gaze. "I don't want to take those things from you." "That's not what I asked." A pause. His hands were on his knees and she could see the slight tension in them. Not anger, just the physical reality of a man who was choosing his words with care because he understood what was at stake. "The world around me has costs," he said. "I've told you that. I can't promise you it'll never touch your life. I told you I was careful, not invisible. But what I want is—" He stopped, tried again. "I'm not interested in a version of you that's been managed into something smaller. I didn't come back to this table because I needed someone convenient." "Then what did you come back for?" He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was doing the thing it did sometimes, opening, just slightly, in a way she suspected most people never saw. "Because you're the only person in my life in years who talks to me like I'm a person and not a position," he said. "And I didn't know how much I needed that until it was in front of me and I almost let it walk down the subway stairs." The futon was uncomfortable. The apartment smelled like turpentine and someone else's dinner. Outside, a cab was leaning on its horn 2 blocks away. Serena looked at him in the bad light of her bad apartment and felt the things she'd been trying not to feel for 3 weeks settle into her chest with the quiet, unwelcome certainty of something that had already decided itself without consulting her. "I need space," she said. The words came out before she'd finished deciding to say them. She saw the impact of them. Not dramatic, not a flinch, but the stillness that moved through him like a current. "How much space?" he asked. "I don't know." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "I need to figure out the scholarship on my own. I need to know I can do that. And I can't think clearly when you're—" She gestured uselessly at all of him. "In proximity." He was quiet for a long time. "All right," he said. "Dante." "I said all right." He stood. He looked at her. And the look was not wounded, not cold, but something more complicated that she didn't have the language for yet. Like a man looking at a decision he's made that he already knows the cost of. "Figure it out," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." He left. The apartment was very quiet. Serena sat on the futon and listened to the sound of the city through the thin walls of a building that had never been built for silence. And she understood, with the particular lucidity that arrives only after something has already changed, that she had just made a choice that would cost her either way. That there was no version of the next 3 weeks that didn't end with her having lost something. And the only question left was which loss she could. She survived the 3 weeks. That was the only honest way to describe it. Not thrived, not managed gracefully, but survived. The way you survive something that requires you to be smaller and harder and more efficient than you normally are. Burning everything non-essential just to keep the core of yourself functional. She stopped going to the jazz club. She stopped taking the long way home. She put the sketchbook away, not permanently, she told herself, just temporarily, because every time she opened it, the profile study was there, the one she'd done on the elevated walkway without meaning to, and looking at it cost her 20 minutes she didn't have. She went to every lecture. She rewrote the critical theory paper twice and turned in the second version at 11:45 on the deadline, sitting on the bathroom floor again. And it was better, genuinely better. She could feel the difference, the argument tighter, the vocabulary less like a foreign language she was translating into in real time. She did the same with the art history midterm, spending 4 days on an essay about negative space in post-war American painting that turned into something she was actually proud of, the kind of writing that happened when exhaustion burned away everything except what was true. She worked her 3 nights at Callaway's. She ate badly and slept worse and did not call Dante. He did not call her either. He texted once, on the 9th day. "How are you?" Not a question. No question mark. Just the words, which felt more honest than a question would have. She stared at it for a long time and then wrote back. "Still here," he responded immediately. "Good." That was all. She held the phone after and felt the strange ache of it, two words that somehow contained everything and nothing at the same time. On December 14th, the day before the review deadline, she got an email from Patricia Howe's office asking her to come in the following morning. She sat in the library and read the email 3 times. The language was neutral, to discuss your academic standing and scholarship status, which could mean anything. She closed her laptop and went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists, the way her mother used to tell her to do when anxiety got ahead of her breathing. And she looked at herself in the mirror and told herself she had done what she could do. She had done what she could do. She went home and set 2 alarms and lay in the dark on the futon, listening to Cass and the boyfriend through the wall, and thought about nothing at all, which took most of the night. Patricia Howe's office smelled like copy paper and old coffee. The morning light came through a window that faced a brick wall and accomplished very little. Howe was already at her desk when Serena arrived, and she had a folder open in front of her and the expression of someone about to deliver a verdict. Serena sat down. She didn't fidget. She'd made a decision on the subway that she would hear whatever there was to hear without performing distress in front of a stranger. "Your critical theory grade came in this morning," Howe said. 91. Serena kept her face still. "Your art history essay?" 94. Howe looked at the folder. "Combined with your portfolio evaluation scores, your cumulative average for the review period is 3.68. The number sat in the air between them. "The threshold is 3.7, Serena said. "Yes." Howe paused. "It is." The silence was brief and absolute. "The committee met yesterday," Howe continued. "There was a discussion about exceptional cases. Students whose portfolio merit substantially exceeds the academic metric." Another pause. "Your portfolio evaluations were described by Professor Aldian as the strongest in your cohort this semester. He submitted a written recommendation on your behalf." Serena said nothing, waited. "The scholarship will be renewed," Howe said. "On academic probationary terms, you'll need to maintain a 3.7 through the spring semester, no exceptions, but it will be renewed." The breath that came out of Serena was not dramatic. It was just breath. The kind that had been held for 3 weeks finally finding its way out. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was even. "Thank Professor Aldian," Howe said, and closed the folder. "What?" She was outside the building, standing on the steps in the December cold with her bag over her shoulder and her whole body feeling strange and lightened and not entirely real, when her phone rang. Not Dante. The number was one she didn't recognize, a 212 area code, and she answered it the way you answer unknown numbers when you're still in the aftermath of significant news, automatically, without thinking. "Serena Vale?" A man's voice, professional, not warm. "Yes. My name is Richard Hale. I'm calling on behalf of Moretti Capital Group." A pause. "I want to inform you that our offices were contacted approximately 3 weeks ago regarding a potential contribution to the Harlow Institute's scholarship fund. Specifically, an endowment proposal was drafted and submitted to the Institute's development office, designated to support merit-based scholarship renewals for students in financial review." The steps were cold under her feet. The city noise continued indifferently around her. "I'm telling you this," Hale continued, "because Mr. Moretti specifically instructed that you be informed. He wanted you to know the proposal was submitted. He also wanted you to know that the committee's decision was made independently. The endowment proposal is for future funding cycles and did not influence your current review outcome." She couldn't speak. "Ms. Vale, I'm here," she said. The words came out flat. "Mr. Moretti asked me to convey that he kept his word. The decision was yours to earn. He simply prepared the ground for future students in your position." Another pause. "He also asked me to tell you that he hopes you'll call when you're ready." The line went quiet. She pulled the phone from her ear and looked at it like it had said something in a language she needed a moment to translate. He had kept his word. He hadn't fixed it. He hadn't called in a favor, hadn't leaned on a committee, hadn't made the problem disappear through the particular alchemy of money and influence that he could have deployed so easily. He'd found a way to care, a way to be present at the edges of the situation without reaching into the middle of it, and he'd made sure she knew about it only after the outcome was decided. She stood on the steps for a long time. Then she called him. He answered on the first ring. Serena. The endowment, she said. A pause. Hale called you. You told him to. I told him to call you after the committee decision was made, yes. She pressed her back against the cold stone of the building. Her throat felt tight in a way she didn't trust. You could have just not told me. I could have, he agreed. Why didn't you? Because you asked me for honesty, and I'm trying to be someone who gives you what you actually ask for. His voice was low and even, but there was something underneath it. The particular strain of a man who has been exercising restraint for 3 weeks and is doing it still. How did the review go? Scholarship renewed. She stopped. I got there on my own. I know you did. By .02 GPA points. I know that too. She laughed. Sudden, short, involuntary. It surprised both of them. That's either a great story or a terrible one, she said. Tell me over dinner, he said. If you want. She exhaled. The cold was in her lungs and her cheeks were numb, and the city moved past her in its brutal, indifferent December way. And she felt, standing there, the specific gravity of a choice being made. Not an impulsive one, not a romantic one, but a deliberate one. The kind you make when you've had 3 weeks of silence to understand exactly what the presence of something means by its absence. Tonight, she said. Morrow's. 7, he said. 7, she agreed, and hung up. Mom. She told him, over pasta in the warm dark of Morrow's, that she wanted to stop pretending she was approaching this carefully. She said it plainly, without theater, the way she said most things that mattered. He listened. He didn't move to fill the silence after she finished. Then he said, I need to tell you something before this goes further. She put her fork down. Tell me, Damian Blackwood is going to be a problem. He said the name like it had weight. He's been trying to build a coalition, a group of independent organizations that would formalize under a single structure. He wants our resources and our networks. My father is considering it. And you? I'm not. His jaw tightened. Blackwood is unstable and ambitious in a way that gets people hurt. An alliance with him changes the nature of what we are in ways I'm not willing to accept. What does this have to do with telling me before this goes further? He looked at her steadily. Because if I refuse the alliance, Damian will look for leverage. And the most visible thing in my life right now is you. The room was warm. The food was good. Everything was fine in every superficial sense. And underneath it, the ground had the quality of something that had decided to shift. You're warning me, she said. I'm being honest with you, he paused. Which means I need to ask you something I don't have the right to ask. Ask it anyway. Do you trust me? She looked at him. The question was simple and enormous, and she understood why he'd asked it now rather than later. Because what came next would require an answer, and she needed to have given it voluntarily before she knew what it would cost. Yes, she said. It came out without hesitation, which surprised her, and didn't. He nodded slowly. Then I want to ask you something else. He paused. I need someone I trust in a professional capacity. My current personal assistant is retiring in January. The role is real: research support, scheduling, correspondence with legitimate business contacts. I'm not offering it to solve your financial situation. But it would, she said. Yes. No apology in his voice, just the fact of it. It would. The salary is significant. The hours are flexible enough that you'd maintain your studies. And you would be there, in proximity to what I do, with full knowledge of what that means. She was quiet for a moment. You want me close? Yes, he said, simply. I want you close. Because of Blackwood. Partly. He held her gaze. Partly because 3 weeks was too long and I'm done pretending I'm comfortable with distance. She picked up her fork again, ate a bite, looked at the table, looked at him. Let me think about it, she said. Take the time you need. She took 4 days. On the 5th day, she called him and said yes. Check. January arrived with a brutality that felt personal. The city went gray and mean in the first week and stayed there, the cold settling in with the patient malice of something that intended to last. Serena started at Moretti Capital on a Monday, a glass and steel building on West 54th that looked from the outside like any other mid-sized Manhattan investment firm, and felt from the inside like something more compressed. The air in the building was different. The people moved differently, precisely, economically, with the practiced neutrality of staff who had learned to see and not see simultaneously. Her office was small and real: a desk, a laptop, a phone, a window that looked onto a courtyard. The work was what Dante had described: correspondence, research, logistics. She was good at it. The organizational instinct that had kept her functional through 3 years of financial precarity translated easily into the rhythms of a professional schedule, and within 2 weeks she had developed systems that made his calendar run more cleanly than it had before she arrived. She saw him every day, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 20 minutes across a conference table surrounded by people she was still learning to read. The professional distance they maintained at the office was deliberate and easy. They had both agreed it was necessary, and they were both disciplined enough to hold it. After hours was different. After hours they ate together and walked and talked, and the thing between them deepened in the way that things deepen when you have time and repetition, not dramatically, but steadily, layer by layer, until she understood things about him that she hadn't been able to access through occasional dinners. And he understood things about her that she hadn't known she was communicating. She learned that he slept badly and had for years, that he kept 3 separate phones and she was only ever to call one of them, that the organization his father ran had tentacles into city government that went deeper than she'd understood, and that the weight of maintaining the legitimate side of Moretti Capital was at least partly Dante's attempt to build something that could eventually stand without the other side, though he had never said this to his father directly and wasn't sure he ever would. She learned that he looked at her work the way someone looks at something that confuses and draws them simultaneously, not understanding the technical language but responding to the emotional content with an accuracy that surprised her. He bought one of her prints without telling her, had it framed, and hung it in the private office. She discovered it on a Tuesday morning and stood in the doorway looking at it for a long moment. "You could have asked," she said when he came in. "You would have said no." "I would have said yes." He looked at her. "Would you?" "Eventually," she admitted. He almost smiled. "I didn't have that kind of time." March came. The work continued. Blackwood's name appeared more frequently in conversations she was adjacent to, usually in the careful half-language of men who were saying things they weren't quite saying. She understood the shape of it without understanding the details. The pressure on Dante's father was increasing, the alliance being pushed as inevitable, the resistance from Dante being framed not as principle but as weakness. She was careful with what she heard. She didn't ask questions she shouldn't. She understood the boundaries of her position without being told, which was itself a form of intelligence, recognizing the edges of a room without touching them. She was beginning, she realized, to understand his world, not to belong to it, but to move through it without breaking. Then she came in early on a Wednesday in late March and found Marcus, Dante's fixer, a quiet man she'd learned to treat with careful respect, standing outside Dante's office with an expression she'd never seen on him before, tight, almost afraid. "Is he in?" she asked. "In a meeting." Marcus looked at her, then, which was not like him, "You should wait." She waited. The meeting, she couldn't hear it through the closed door, which meant whoever was inside wasn't raising their voice, which somehow made it worse. 40 minutes, 50. She answered emails and made calls and watched the door and did not let herself think about what the particular quality of Marcus's expression had meant. The door opened. 2 men came out first. She recognized them as members of her father's inner circle. Men she'd seen at a dinner in February, men who had looked at her that night with the careful assessment of people evaluating a variable. They passed her without acknowledgement. Then an older man she had seen in photographs but never in person. He was shorter than she'd expected, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, with a face that had been handsome once and was now something more formidable, all the softness replaced by certainty, the kind of certainty that comes from spending decades making decisions that couldn't be undone. He wore a dark suit and moved with the deliberate economy of a man who wasted nothing. Enzo Moretti stopped in front of her desk. She stood, not because she'd decided to. Her body made the decision before her mind caught up. He looked at her for a moment with dark eyes that were a generation removed from Dante's but shared the same quality: gathering, evaluating. "You're the assistant," he said. "Yes," she said. "Serena Vale." "I know your name." He held her gaze. His voice was neutral, not warm, not hostile, just weighted. "My son speaks highly of your work." "Thank you." He nodded once, slowly, like he was filing something. Then he moved past her toward the elevator. His two men followed. The elevator arrived and took them. Serena turned toward Dante's office. He was standing in the doorway. He looked, not shaken, but the particular controlled version of shaken that was his equivalent. Jaw set, eyes careful, the slight tension across his shoulders that she recognized as the external sign of an internal reckoning. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He stepped back from the door. She followed him in. He closed it behind them. "My father has made a decision," he said. She waited. "He's agreed to the Blackwood alliance." Dante moved to the window, stood with his back to her, looking out at the courtyard. "It's done. Not pending, not in discussion. Done." "And you?" I told him no. He turned around. His eyes were steady, but there was something behind them she'd only glimpsed before. A fatigue that went down deep, the kind that accumulated over decades of carrying the wrong things. I told him I wouldn't facilitate the alliance, wouldn't provide resources or access, wouldn't put the legitimate operations in service of whatever Blackwood builds. What did he say? Dante was quiet for a moment. He said that family doesn't have the luxury of principles. The words sat in the air. "There's more," she said. Not a question. He looked at her directly. Blackwood made a condition. For the alliance. A pause. "He wants you gone." She heard it. Let it sit. "Gone how?" "Your position here. He sees your presence as influence. A civilian inside the operation who reports to no one except me." Dante's voice was controlled, but the control was effortful. "My father didn't disagree with the characterization. Your father wants me fired. My father wants the alliance. Removing you is the cost of entry." He held her gaze. "I told him no." "Dante, I told him no," he repeated. The flatness in his voice had a finality to it that she recognized now. Not stubbornness, but something older and more fundamental. A man at the edge of a line he'd drawn. She crossed the office to stand closer to him, not touching, just near, the way they were sometimes, in proximity that meant something without requiring explanation. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now Blackwood has a problem," Dante said, "and my father is angry. And the alliance is paused, at least, while they recalibrate." He exhaled through his nose. "And there's a meeting in 6 weeks. My family's estate in Connecticut. The kind of gathering that happens when decisions need to be made in front of everyone, so no one can claim they didn't understand." "Will I be there?" He looked at her. The question had edges. Both of them knew it. Bringing her to that gathering was a statement. Leaving her behind was a different one. "I want you there," he said, "but I need you to understand what it means." "Tell me." "It means you're not an assistant anymore," he said, "in their eyes, in everyone's eyes." He held her gaze. "It means you're mine, and they'll treat you accordingly," which isn't gentle. She stood in the quiet office with the March light coming through the window and the print of her own work on the wall, and she thought about 3 weeks on a futon and a .02 margin and a man who kept his word in a way that left no fingerprints. "I know what I'm walking into," she said. "Do you?" "No," she said honestly, "but I know who I'm walking in with." Something crossed his face, unguarded, brief, the door opening all the way for just a moment before it settled back. He reached out and touched her face. Just his hand against her jaw, nothing more. The first time he'd touched her like that, and it was so simple and so careful that she felt it everywhere. 6 weeks, he said. 6 weeks, she agreed. She went back to her desk. She answered emails. She managed the calendar. She did the work. And she did not let herself think about the fact that somewhere in the city, Damian Blackwood had just been told no by a man who didn't say no easily, and that men like Damian Blackwood did not absorb that answer and move on. The 6 weeks passed, the way time passes before something irreversible, too fast in the days, too slow in the nights. Serena learned the shape of Damian Blackwood from the edges of conversations she was permitted to hear and the negative space of the ones she wasn't. He was 44, self-made in the particular way that meant he had built something from violence and called it enterprise. He controlled distribution networks across 3 states and had ambitions that ran east to the Atlantic and south into territory that had been stable for 15 years under arrangements that predated him. He was the kind of man who mistook the silence of people who were being careful for the silence of people who were afraid, and that mistake had made him consistently underestimate resistance. He had underestimated Dante. Dante knew this and did not correct the misunderstanding. He let Blackwood believe the refusal was personal, about Serena, about pride, rather than what it actually was, a strategic assessment that the alliance would compromise the legitimate operations beyond recovery within 3 years. "He thinks this is about you," Dante told her one evening, 10 days before the Connecticut gathering. They were in his office late, the building quiet around them, the city pressing its orange light against the windows. "Is it?" she asked. "Partly." He didn't look up from the file he was reviewing. "But if it were only about you, I'd have found another way. I'm refusing because Blackwood is what happens when ambition outpaces discipline, and everyone who's touched his operations ends up either consumed or destroyed." He turned a page. "The fact that he wants you removed is a symptom, not the disease. He wants me removed because I'm leverage. He wants you removed because he can't threaten you without threatening me." Dante set down the file. "And threatening me is too expensive right now, so he does the next thing. He makes your presence the issue, turns it into a question of my judgment, lets my father carry the argument for him." She looked at him. "Your father's not wrong that I change things." "No," Dante agreed. "He's wrong about whether that's a problem." Waltz. They drove to Connecticut on a Friday afternoon, the city giving way to suburbs and then to the particular green stillness of coastal New England in May, everything too clean and too quiet after Manhattan, the air tasting like salt and cut grass. Dante drove himself. No driver, which she understood was a choice about privacy. He was quiet for most of the drive, not tense exactly, but concentrated, running something internal that she didn't interrupt. The estate was on a private road 20 minutes off the highway. Gates, a long gravel approach, the house itself emerging from old trees as a long stone structure with wings that had been added across generations. The kind of house that had been built to last and had absorbed its own history without apology. "How many people?" she said as they pulled in. 40 tonight, more tomorrow." He cut the engine, sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. "My father will want to speak with you privately at some point this weekend." "All right. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say." "Dante." He looked at her. "I've been managing difficult men for 3 months," she said. "I'll manage your father." Something moved through his expression. Not quite relief, but the adjacent thing. He got out of the car. The gathering had the surface of a social event and the substance of something else entirely. She could feel it from the first hour. The way conversations had structure beneath their pleasantness. The way men shook hands and held the grip a half-second longer than necessary. The way eyes moved across rooms with the calculating patience of people who were always counting. 40 people over dinner, and by Serena's read, approximately 6 of them were there purely socially. She was introduced as Dante's personal assistant. She watched the slight recalibration in people's expressions when they heard it. Assistant landing differently here than it would anywhere else. The word carrying a freight of implication that had nothing to do with calendars and correspondence. Vivian was there. Serena saw her across the dining room before dinner and felt her pulse tick up once and then settle. Vivian was seated near Enzo Moretti, elegantly composed as always, speaking to an older woman with the practiced warmth of someone who had spent years maintaining access through charm. She didn't look at Serena, which was itself a look. Damian Blackwood arrived after dinner. She knew him before she was introduced. He had the particular presence of a man who had taught himself to fill a room, the physical confidence of someone who had won enough physical confrontations that his body had learned to lead with certainty. He was heavy-set, but not soft, with a broad face and small, quick eyes that moved constantly. Expensive suit, gold watch that was slightly too large for the wrist. The details of a man who had earned his way into this world rather than been born into it, and who still occasionally overcalibrated the signals. He shook her hand when Dante introduced them. His grip was deliberate, firm enough to be a statement, brief enough to be deniable. "I've heard about you," he said. "Good things, I hope," she said pleasantly, which was what you said, which communicated nothing, which was the correct response. He smiled. It didn't reach the quick eyes. "Of course," she smiled back with the same depth. Dante's hand was at the small of her back, not possessive, just present, a point of contact that said, "I'm here," without announcing it to the room. The trouble started at 10. The formal dinner had dissolved into smaller conversations, distributed across the house's ground floor, people moving between the dining room and the library, and the long sitting room that overlooked the back terrace, and the darkness beyond it, where the ocean was, invisible but audible. A low, constant movement under everything. Serena was in the library talking to a woman named Elena, married to one of Dante's legitimate business partners, about a gallery she'd visited in New Haven when Enzo Moretti appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Vale." Not a question. "A moment." Elena excused herself with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years recognizing when a conversation was being requisitioned. Serena followed him to a smaller room off the library. A study. Books on 3 walls, a desk that had been used for serious work. He closed the door behind them. He didn't sit. Neither did she. He looked at her in silence for a moment. Up close, the resemblance to Dante was in the structure rather than the expression. The same bones, the same quality of attention, but where Dante's attention had warmth underneath it, Enzo's was purely evaluative. She was being assessed the way you assess a contract, looking for the terms that were unacceptable. "Tell me what you know about my son's business," he said. "I know what's relevant to my position," she said, "which is the legitimate side." "And the other side?" "Enough not to be naive, not enough to be useful to anyone who'd want to use it." A pause. He tilted his head slightly. "That's a careful answer." "It's an accurate one." "My son trusts you considerably," he said. The word considerably had weight to it. Not disapproval, just observation. "I've tried to earn that." "People don't earn Dante's trust," he said. "He decides to give it. That's different. And it makes him vulnerable in ways he doesn't fully account for." He moved to the desk, put his hands on it, looked at her across the surface. "You understand what the Blackwood situation is?" "I understand it's complicated." "It's simple," he said. "Dante is refusing a significant alliance on principle. Principle is expensive. The principle in this case appears to involve you." "With respect," she said, keeping her voice even, "Dante's objection to the Blackwood alliance is strategic, not personal. He's told me clearly, what my son tells you and what drives my son are not always the same thing." He cut across her without raising his voice, simply inserted his words into the space before hers were finished, the technique of a man accustomed to being the end of conversations. He has always been like this, singular. Once he decides something matters, it eclipses everything else. A pause. "You matter. The question is at what cost?" She held his gaze. "I'm not asking him to refuse anything." "You don't have to ask." He straightened. "That's the problem." He studied her for another moment. "Damien Blackwood is not a man who absorbs a no gracefully. You understand that?" "Yes." "Then you understand that your continued presence here, in his organization, in his life, is a provocation to a man who has the resources and the temperament to respond to provocation badly." The fire in the small grate made a sound. Outside, somewhere, the ocean moved. "What are you asking me to do?" she said. "I'm asking you to consider whether what you feel for my son is worth what it will cost him." He said it simply, without cruelty, which was somehow worse than cruelty. "This is not an ultimatum. I am not threatening you. I am asking you, as his father, to look at the situation clearly." She was quiet for a long moment. "I've looked at it clearly since before I understood all of it," she said. "And I'm still here." Something shifted in his expression, not warmth, but a recalibration, like a man updating an assessment. He nodded once. "Then we'll see what the weekend brings," he said, and opened the study door. She found Dante on the back terrace at 11:30, standing at the stone railing with a glass of water, looking out at the darkness where the ocean was. "How was he?" Dante asked without turning. Direct, she said. Fair, actually. He turned then, looked at her face in the dim light from the house behind her. Did he ask you to leave? He asked me to consider the costs. What did you say? That I had. He set the glass down on the railing. The night air was cold off the water, and she could smell the salt in it. He looked at her with the door open expression, the one she'd learned to recognize as the version of him that wasn't performing anything. I'm going to tell you something, he said. Tell me. I've been building the case against this alliance for 8 months. Documentation, financial projections, risk analysis. The argument doesn't need you in it. It stands on its own terms. He paused. But my father isn't wrong that you changed what I'm willing to fight for. You didn't change the argument. You changed my tolerance for backing down from it. She felt that land. Is that a problem? For some people, he said. Not for me. The terrace door opened behind her. She turned. Damian Blackwood stepped out. He was alone, which she registered immediately as wrong. Men like Blackwood moved with people around them, not for protection exactly, but for the social geometry of power, the implicit message of satellites in orbit. His being alone meant this wasn't social. He had a drink in his hand and a smile that had never been warm, and he looked at both of them with the particular ease of a man who had decided something. Beautiful night, he said. Dante said nothing. His body hadn't moved, but the quality of his stillness had changed. She could feel it, the way you feel a current shift before the weather breaks. I thought we might talk, Blackwood said. He was looking at Dante, but his eyes moved to Serena with a frequency that felt calculated. The three of us, informally. It's late, Dante said. It won't take long. Blackwood stepped closer. He had the measured movement of a man who had learned to use physical space deliberately. I've been thinking about our situation, the disagreement. He took a sip of his drink. I think there's been some confusion about what I'm actually asking for. There hasn't been, Dante said. Hear me out. Blackwood's voice stayed pleasant. I don't need your full cooperation. I need access. Specific, limited access to 2 distribution channels and the Harwick Logistics Network. 3 months, and then whatever arrangement you want going forward. He paused. In exchange, I stepped back from the conversation about internal personnel. The word personnel landed like a fist would have landed more honestly. Serena felt her jaw set, kept her face still. No, Dante said. Blackwood's smile didn't move. You haven't thought about it. I don't need to. Dante. Blackwood's voice dropped slightly, the pleasantness thinning like paint on old wood. I'm offering you a clean resolution. 3 months and this entire dispute is finished. Your father gets the alliance he wants. You maintain your operational independence afterward. The girl, his eyes moved to Serena with an unhurried deliberateness that was its own kind of threat, stays exactly where she is. Nobody loses anything they need to keep. Except my self-respect, Dante said, which isn't a trade I make. The pleasantness finished thinning. Underneath it was something that had always been there. Harder, less managed, the original material that the pleasantness had been applied over. You're making a mistake, Blackwood said quietly. Then it's mine to make. Blackwood looked at him for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to Serena. Slowly, with an assessment that had nothing respectful in it, the look of a man deciding how something could be used. She must be something extraordinary, he said, to be worth this. Watch yourself, Dante said. The words were quiet, completely quiet, the kind of quiet that had nothing to do with softness. Blackwood held the look for 2 more seconds. Then he turned and went back inside. The terrace was silent, except for the ocean. Serena realized she'd been holding her breath and let it out slowly. Her hands were steady, but her pulse was hard in her throat. He's not done, she said. No. Dante picked up the glass of water. His hand was perfectly still. He's recalculating. What does that mean? It means tomorrow will be worse. He looked at her. Stay close to me. Don't go anywhere alone. If someone asks to speak with you privately, and it isn't someone I've introduced as completely trustworthy, find me first. You're expecting something specific. I'm expecting him to move the problem from negotiation to demonstration. His voice was even. He's going to try to show everyone here that I can be pressured, one way or another. She nodded. filed it, looked at the dark water. "I'm not going to run," she said. "I know. I want you to know I know what that costs." He looked at her. "It costs less than the alternative." They went back inside. But Saturday moved with the particular tension of a day that knows what it's building toward. The morning was formal, a business breakfast, presentations, the kind of structured conversation that was really a series of position statements delivered in the language of discussion. Serena sat at Dante's right and took notes, and kept her face professional and watched Damian Blackwood across the table conducting his own calculations behind his eyes. Enzo Moretti sat at the head of the table and presided with the authority of a man who had chaired 30 years of these meetings and understood that the real content was never in what was said. At noon, Dante's father spoke. He spoke about the organization, about continuity and strength, about the necessity of adaptation in changing conditions. He spoke about the Blackwood Alliance with the careful language of a man announcing a decision that had been made, not inviting debate. He spoke about the importance of unified direction. He did not look at Dante while he spoke. Dante did not look away from him. The afternoon had the quality of a held breath. People moved through the estate's rooms with the slightly heightened alertness of people who sensed a precipice without knowing its exact location. At 4, Serena went to find a bathroom in the east wing, because the one near the main gathering rooms was occupied. The east wing was quieter, a long hallway with photographs of the family across decades on one wall. She was on her way back when she heard her name. She stopped. Vivian's voice. From a room just ahead, door slightly open. "The girl has no idea what she's standing in the middle of," Vivian was saying. "She thinks it's a love story." A male voice she didn't recognize. "And Dante?" "Dante has decided she's worth burning everything for, which is..." A pause. Not the first time he's made that kind of decision. Serena stood in the hallway, did not move. "Blackwood's going to move tonight," the male voice said. "I know," Vivian said. Her voice was not cruel, just tired and certain, and the combination was somehow worse than cruelty. "There's nothing to be done about it. Dante won't compromise and Blackwood won't absorb the refusal. Something breaks tonight." "And her?" A pause, longer than the others. "She'll either understand what she is now," Vivian said, "or she'll find out the hard way." Serena walked back to the main rooms. Her heels were quiet on the stone floor. Her breathing was even. She found Dante in the sitting room with 2 men she recognized, and she touched his arm briefly, enough to get his attention, and he excused himself. "What?" he said quietly. "Blackwood moves tonight," she said. "I don't know from who or how I know, but I know." He looked at her for 1 second, didn't question it. "Stay with me from now on." "Yes." Dinner was at 7. By 8, the rooms had the compressed energy of something on the verge of breaking. The conversations too careful, the laughter too precise, the movement of people with the slightly mechanical quality of actors performing normalcy. Serena ate and spoke when spoken to, and kept Dante in her peripheral vision at all times, and counted exits and thought about what Vivian had said with a clarity that surprised her. She'll either understand what she is now, or she'll find out the hard way. She understood what she was. She had understood for months. She was the thing Dante had chosen that hadn't been chosen for him. The first entirely voluntary decision in a life that had been structured by inheritance and expectation. That was what made her dangerous to men like Blackwood and Enzo both. Not her presence in the organization, not the access she had, but the simple and irrefutable fact that Dante had looked at everything available to him and picked something that wasn't on the menu. Men who built empires on obligation did not know what to do with men who chose freely. At 9:15, Dante was called away from her side by one of his father's men. A brief conversation needed in the study, 5 minutes. He looked at her. 5 minutes, she said. I'll be fine. He went. She was standing near the long windows that overlooked the back terrace, a glass of water in her hand, when Vivian appeared at her side with the smooth unhurriedness that was her signature. You heard me, Vivian said quietly. Not a question. Yes. Then you know what's coming. Something from Blackwood, Serena said. Tonight. Vivian looked at her for a moment with an expression that Serena hadn't seen on her before. Not the composed evaluation, not the calibrated warmth, but something older and less managed. He's going to try to remove you from the equation, she said. Physically, not permanently. He's not stupid enough to do that here, but visibly. Publicly enough that Dante's response becomes the story. Serena felt the cold move through her, kept her face still. Why are you telling me this? Vivienne was quiet for a moment. Because I've spent 3 years resenting you for a position I vacated myself, she said, and the precision of the admission was devastating, and I'm tired of it. She looked away, and because what happens to you tonight shouldn't happen to anyone on my watch. The terrace door at the far end of the room opened. Damian Blackwood came through it. Behind him, one of his men. He was looking directly at Serena. Vivienne stepped back. One step, just enough. Serena set down the water glass on the windowsill beside her. Her pulse was loud in her ears, but her hands weren't shaking, and she planted her feet on the expensive carpet and looked directly back at the man coming toward her and thought clearly, with the particular clarity of someone who has already decided, I am not moving. He crossed the room in 12 steps. The conversation around them continued. No one had registered the shift yet. The room too large and too loud, and he moved with the practiced casualness of a man doing something that should look incidental until it wasn't. He stopped in front of her, close, the distance that meant something. Miss Vale, he said pleasantly, could I borrow you for a moment? There's something on the terrace I wanted to show you. No, thank you, she said. His smile stayed in place. It'll only take a minute. I heard you the first time. Something moved behind his eyes. The smile didn't break, but it recalibrated. The pleasantness contracting, the harder thing underneath expanding. He took one step closer, which made the physical geometry unmistakable. I think you misunderstand the invitation, he said quietly. I'm asking politely. I understand the invitation completely, she said, and her voice was steady and clear. And I said no. His hand closed around her arm. Not violent, controlled, deliberate, the grip of a man who had made a calculation and was executing it. She felt the pressure of his fingers through the fabric of her sleeve and the cold clarity of the moment. This was the demonstration. This was Blackwood showing the room that he could put his hands on the thing Dante valued, and Dante's response would be the story. A voice came from across the room, not loud, not raised, but it hit the air like something physical, and the conversations nearest to them stopped instantly, heads turning, and Serena felt Blackwood's grip loosen by a fraction. Take your hands off my wife. The room went silent. Dante was standing 20 feet away, and he was not running, was not shouting, was not reaching for anything. He was standing completely still in the doorway from the hall, and the quality of his stillness was the most dangerous thing in the room. His eyes were on Blackwood's hand on Serena's arm, and his expression had the cold, absolute certainty of a man who has passed the point of calculating consequences and arrived somewhere on the other side of... The word wife hung in the air of that room like smoke after a shot. Nobody moved. Not the people nearest to them, not the men by the terrace door, not Vivienne at the edge of Serena's vision. The entire gathered weight of 40 people, their money, their history, their calculations, compressed into a single suspended second. And in that second, Blackwood's hand was still on Serena's arm, and Dante was still across the room, and the distance between those two facts was the only thing that mattered. Then Dante walked. Not fast, not the run of panic or the charge of rage, just a walk, measured and absolute, crossing the carpet with the deliberate economy of a man who has decided that the space between here and there no longer exists and is simply closing it. People stepped aside without being asked. The room parted around him the way rooms part around something that has made its nature unambiguous. He stopped in front of Blackwood, close. The same deliberate proximity Blackwood had used on Serena returned with precision. Blackwood released her arm, not because he was afraid, or not only because of that, because the room was watching, because 40 people, including Enzo Moretti, were now turned toward this corner of the estate's sitting room, and because whatever calculation Blackwood had made about public demonstration had just been answered with a counter-demonstration he hadn't prepared for. Step back, Dante said. Blackwood stepped back. One step. He kept his face composed, the smile gone now, replaced by something flatter and more honest. His eyes were doing rapid work, reassessing, recalculating. This is a misunderstanding, Blackwood said. No, Dante said. It isn't. The silence in the room had a texture now. the specific quality of people who have stopped pretending to do anything except witness. Serena stood beside Dante and felt his arm come around her, not dramatically, just a hand at her back, and she let it be there. Enzo Moretti crossed the room. He moved with the authority of a man who had spent 30 years being the gravitational center of rooms exactly like this one, and when he stopped beside his son, the geometry of it was unmistakable. Not choosing sides, not yet, but standing in the space where the decision would be made. He looked at Blackwood. Blackwood looked back with the careful expression of a man who had built everything he had through the willingness to hold a stare. And for 3 seconds, neither of them moved. "Damien," Enzo said. "Just the name. The way you say a name when the name is the entire sentence." Blackwood's jaw shifted. "Enzo, this was a private conversation." "In my house," Enzo said. "At my table." He paused. "With my sons." And here he stopped, and the pause was its own kind of declaration. And then he finished, "With my family." The word landed. Serena felt it land in her own chest. Unexpected, unasked for, the weight of it coming from a man who had spent 2 days evaluating her as a liability. Blackwood looked at the room. Read it. Read the faces of men he'd expected to be neutral, men he'd expected to be calculating whether the alliance was worth the disruption, and found something he hadn't projected. Not hostility, but the particular settled quality of people who have watched someone overstep and have decided how they feel about it. He had miscalculated. He had come here expecting to demonstrate that Dante could be pressured, that the girl was the pressure point, that putting his hands on her in front of witnesses would force a choice that exposed weakness. But the choice had been made immediately and without hesitation, and the word that had come across the room, wife, had done something to the calculus that his model hadn't accounted for. He picked up his drink from the side table beside him, took a sip, set it down. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said to Enzo. His voice was controlled. "We won't," Enzo said. A beat. "The alliance is finished," Enzo continued, quietly. "Finally. Whatever terms were on the table are off it. You came into my home and put your hands on someone under my roof." He paused. "That's not a business disagreement. That's a matter of character. And I don't build with men whose character I can't rely on." Blackwood looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across his face, the controlled surface cracking slightly at the edges, the frustration of a man who had played a move that had reversed entirely. He looked at Dante, then at Serena, then back at Enzo. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I've made larger ones," Enzo said, "and I've survived them." Blackwood set down his drink. He straightened his jacket. He looked around the room one more time with the face of a man assembling a new plan from the wreckage of the old one, and then he walked to the terrace door and his man followed him and the door closed and the room breathed. The sound of conversation returned slowly, the way sound returns after something loud, cautiously, in patches, people turning back to each other with the slightly dazed quality of witnesses comparing notes. Serena exhaled. Her arm ached where Blackwood had gripped it. She would find a bruise there tomorrow, a dark band above the elbow, and she would look at it in the bathroom mirror and feel neither fragile nor dramatic about it. Just the fact of it, evidence of a moment that had happened and been survived. Dante turned to her, looked at her face. His hand was still at her back. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. He looked at her arm. "Serena." "A bruise," she said. "I'm fine." He held her gaze for a moment. The room was still around them, people moving in the background, and his father was 3 feet away. But in that moment, the distance between everything else and the two of them felt like miles. "I called you my wife," he said. "I noticed." "I didn't plan that." "I know. But I meant it." She looked at him, looked at his face, the structure of it, the shadows in the right places, the lines at the corners of his eyes. She thought about a rainy sidewalk and a ruined suit, and the strange patience of a man who had crouched on wet pavement to pick up her work without being asked. She thought about 3 weeks on a futon and a .02 margin, and a word said across a silent room with the force of something that couldn't be unsaid. "I know that too," she said. Enzo Moretti turned from where he'd been speaking with 2 of his men and looked at his son, at Serena, at the space between them that was not very large and had not been large for a while. He said nothing for a moment, Just looked, with those gathering eyes, updating the assessment he'd been running since February. "Come," he said finally, to both of them. "Sit down." The conversation with Enzo lasted 2 hours, not a confrontation, not a negotiation. Something harder than both, an honest accounting, the kind that only happens when performance has become too expensive to maintain. They sat in the study where he'd spoken to Serena alone 2 days ago, the three of them, and Enzo talked, and Dante talked, and Serena mostly listened, except when she was asked directly, and the fire in the grate burned down slowly while the house around them resettled into something quieter. Enzo talked about the organization, not the surface version, not the managed version, but the actual weight of it across 30 years. The decisions that couldn't be undone. The costs that had been paid by people who hadn't fully understood what they were agreeing to. He talked about Dante's mother, briefly, just a sentence, almost swallowed. She knew what she'd married, and she carried it without complaint, and I never deserved that from her. He moved past it quickly, but it sat in the room. He talked about the alliance, about why he'd pushed for it, about the genuine strategic reasoning that had nothing to do with Blackwood personally, and everything to do with the pressure of a landscape that was shifting in ways that made isolation increasingly expensive. He acknowledged that Dante's analysis was not wrong. He said it once, without qualification, which cost him something visible. Dante talked about the legitimate operations, the 15-year project of building something that could stand independently, something that didn't require the other side to be viable. He laid out the numbers with the patience of a man who had been preparing this argument for a long time and had finally been given the room to make it. He talked about what the Blackwood Alliance would have done to those operations within 3 years. He talked about it clinically, without accusation. Then he looked at his father and said, "I needed you to trust my judgment. You didn't." Enzo was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "I didn't." Another pause. "I'm telling you now that I should have." It was not an apology. It was something more difficult than an apology. An acknowledgement from a man who did not make them, delivered in the only language he had for it. Serena watched Dante receive it, watched the slight adjustment in the set of his shoulders. Not relief exactly, but the particular physical change that happens when something you've been braced against for a long time is no longer pushing. When she was asked, she was direct. She told Enzo what she'd told him 2 days ago, that she had looked at the situation clearly and chosen to remain in it, and that she understood what remaining meant, not in the abstract but in the specific, the bruise on her arm, the surveillance photograph, the managed meeting at the Chelsea Gala. She told him she wasn't naive, and she wasn't performing bravery. She was simply someone who had decided what she valued and was prepared to pay for it. He looked at her for a long time after that. "My son said you were extraordinary," he said finally. "I told him all men in his position think the woman they've chosen is extraordinary." She waited. "He was right," Enzo said. "And I was reflexive." He paused. "You have my blessing. For whatever it's worth from a man like me." It was worth something. She didn't pretend otherwise. "Thank you," she said. The guests left on Sunday morning. Blackwood was gone before dawn. His car on the gravel road at 5:15, no goodbyes, the departure of a man who understood that he had spent a significant amount of leverage and received nothing in return. His alliance was finished. His financial exposure to the Harwick logistics network, which Marcus had spent 3 months quietly documenting at Dante's direction, would be a different conversation with different people in the coming weeks. He was not destroyed. He was diminished, which for a man of his ambitions was perhaps worse. Vivienne left at 9. She found Serena in the kitchen, the household staff not yet fully mobilized, the coffee made but the room otherwise quiet. And she came in and poured herself a cup without asking and stood at the counter. "He meant it," Vivienne said. "The word he used last night." "I know." Vivienne looked at her coffee. "When he ended the engagement 5 years ago, he told me that he couldn't marry someone because it made sense, that he'd spent his entire life doing things because they made sense, and it had made him into something he didn't entirely recognize." She paused. "I told him he was being naive. That sense was what kept people alive in this world." Serena was quiet. "I was right," Vivienne said, "and I was completely wrong." She looked up. Sense keeps you alive. It doesn't keep you. She stopped, searched for the word, settled for, it doesn't keep you yours. The kitchen was warm and quiet. The coffee was good. I'm sorry, Serena said, for whatever happened between you, even the version I wasn't part of. Vivian looked at her, surprised, briefly, genuinely, the composure cracking for just a moment into something that was simply a person on the other side of a long, complicated thing. Don't be sorry, she said. Be careful. She set down the cup. And be difficult. He needs someone who will be difficult. She left. Serena finished her coffee alone in the kitchen and looked out at the estate's back lawn in the Sunday morning light, the grass wet and silver, the trees at the property edge holding the last of the season's leaves, and she thought about all the rooms she'd moved through to arrive in this one: Providence, the subway, the rain-slick sidewalk, the turpentine futon, the jazz club with the sleeping bassist, and felt the particular strange weight of a life that had been going somewhere without telling her. Dante found her on the back terrace at noon. The day was clean and cold. The ocean was visible from here in daylight, gray-green, moving steadily, indifferent to the weekend's events with the absolute self-possession of something that had been doing this long before any of them arrived and would continue doing it long after. She had been standing at the railing for 20 minutes, just looking at it, and when she heard his footsteps on the stone, she didn't turn. He stood beside her, his shoulder close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth of him. They stood in silence for a while. The ocean did what the ocean did. Marcus confirmed this morning, he said finally. Blackwood's network has 4 exposure points in the Harwick documentation, enough to make his next 18 months very difficult without us lifting a finger. He'll spend his energy managing that. Is that enough to keep him from being a problem? For now, Dante said. Possibly longer. A man like that, once the momentum breaks, it's hard to rebuild. He paused. He'll look for easier ground. She nodded. Your father? My father and I have a longer conversation ahead of us, years of it. He was quiet for a moment. But it started last night. That's more than I expected. She turned to look at him. He was watching the water, his profile against the gray sky, the same structure she'd drawn on that elevated walkway in January, and she thought about that drawing. Still in the sketchbook, still folded in the back behind the grocery lists and the deadline notes, and felt the whole long thread of it, the rain, the coffee, the card under the takeout menus, the 3 weeks of silence, the .02 margin, all of it pulling toward this stone terrace and this ocean and this man standing beside her like he'd decided the only place worth being was exactly here. You called me your wife, she said. I know. In front of 40 people. Yes. Including your father. Especially my father. He turned to look at her. His eyes had the quality she'd stopped trying to name and had simply accepted. The particular depth of someone paying attention in a way that didn't have an off switch. I know it wasn't a proposal. It wasn't planned, and it didn't come with a question. He paused. I'm asking the question now. The ocean moved. A gull somewhere made a sound and then didn't. She looked at him for a long moment, at the lines and the shadows, and the particular exhaustion that was not defeat, but the honest cost of being exactly what he was, carrying exactly what he carried, and choosing, despite all of it, to be here and ask this. You understand what you're asking me to walk into, she said. I understand it better than anyone. His voice was even. I'm not going to promise you it's easy. I'm not going to tell you the world around me will leave us alone or that there won't be more weekends like this one. He held her gaze. I'm going to tell you that I am done making decisions based on what the world expects of me. I've done it my entire life. I'm done. He paused. And I'm going to tell you that the only completely voluntary choice I've made since I was old enough to know what voluntary means is you. She looked at the ocean, looked at him. She thought about her mother working 2 jobs in Providence without complaint, about Marco in his apartment not understanding why she'd come here, about Professor Aldean submitting a written recommendation on her behalf at the last possible moment, about Doris at the bar saying, "Be careful, sweetheart," with the blunt care of someone who had seen the shape of things clearly, about a gala in Chelsea and the strange reverse gift of Vivian's warning, which had terrified her and had also been, She understood now, a form of honesty. She thought about herself on the subway 3 days after a rainy sidewalk, looking at a name in a business article and telling herself it meant nothing. Yes, she said. The word came out clean and certain, the way her best lines always came, not labored, not decorated, just exactly the true thing placed exactly where it needed to be. He exhaled. It was the first time she'd seen him breathe like that, the breath of someone releasing something they'd been holding for a long time. He reached out and put his hand against her face, his thumb at her cheekbone, and she leaned into it slightly, just slightly, the way you lean into warmth when you've been cold. He kissed her. Finally, simply, with none of the performance that the moment could have demanded and didn't need. The ocean moved and the wind came off the water and the estate was quiet behind them, and it was nothing like a scene. It was just two people on a stone terrace at the end of a long, difficult weekend, choosing each other in the plain, unsentimental morning light. They married the following October in Central Park. Small, 23 people, the kind of number that meant everyone there was genuinely chosen. Marco came up from Providence and spent the first hour being carefully respectful of Dante, and the second hour talking to him about load-bearing walls with the unselfconscious ease of a man who had decided that the scary thing was just a person after all. Serena's mother wore a blue dress she'd bought for the occasion and cried at the precise moment she'd promised herself she wouldn't, and held Serena's face in both hands before the ceremony and said, "You look like someone who has arrived somewhere," and Serena had said, "I think I have." Mom, and meant it completely. Enzo Moretti attended. He sat in the front row with the contained stillness of a man processing something he hadn't expected to feel, and at the reception he shook Dante's hand with both of his own and said nothing and didn't need to. Vivian sent flowers, white ones. The card was blank on both sides, which was itself a message, and Serena understood it and appreciated it for exactly what it was. Marcus wore a suit that was clearly new and clearly uncomfortable and toasted them with the brief warmth of a man who was not given to speeches but had decided this warranted 3 sentences, which was, from Marcus, a significant emotional investment. 6 months after the wedding, Serena's first gallery exhibition opened in a converted warehouse space in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, 31 pieces. Mostly large format, the figure studies, the charcoal work, a series she'd developed over the past year that used negative space in a way she'd been working toward since that warped sketchbook on a wet Manhattan morning. The series was called Collision, and if you didn't know the story behind it, you read it one way, and if you did, you read it another. And both readings were correct, which was the point. Professor Aldian came. He stood in front of the largest piece, the centerpiece of the Collision series, a 2-by-3-foot charcoal study that had started as a quick profile sketch on an elevated walkway in January and had been reworked across 18 months into something that was no longer a portrait, but a study in the force of things meeting. And he stood there for 4 minutes without speaking, which was the most he had ever said about her work. "You've arrived," he told her. "Someone else said that recently," she said. "They were right," he said, and moved on to the next piece. The exhibition sold 22 of 31 works. Not all to names she recognized, some to strangers, people who had simply walked in from the street because of the sign outside, people who had no connection to anyone in her life, and who had simply stood in front of something she'd made and felt it find them. That was the part that stayed with her longest. Not the numbers, not the reviews that appeared in 2 arts publications the following week, but the fact of strangers in a warehouse in Brooklyn standing in front of her work and feeling something that was theirs. Dante stood at the back of the room for most of the evening, not hovering, just present, in the way he was present, with the quality of attention that didn't demand acknowledgement. He talked to the people who approached him and listened more than he spoke, and once, when she caught his eye across the room while she was talking to someone who wanted to discuss the conceptual framework of the series, he simply looked at her with that expression, the open one, the unguarded one, and she felt it the way she always felt it, like being seen at a frequency she hadn't known she broadcast. Later, after the last guest had left and the gallery staff were quietly beginning to close up, she found him standing in front of the centerpiece. She stood beside him. The warehouse was quiet. The work on the walls didn't care who was looking at it. "Tell me what you see," she said. He looked at it for a long moment. She watched his face, the structure, the shadows, the tiredness that had changed over the past year, gotten a different quality. Not lighter exactly, more inhabited, like a man who had moved back into rooms he'd been using as storage. Two things that hit each other, he said, and neither of them broke. She looked at the piece. That's it, she said. That's exactly it. He didn't say anything else. She didn't need him to. They turned off the lights and went out into the Brooklyn night, the city enormous and indifferent around them, doing what it had always done, grinding forward with its noise and its money and its cold and its occasional impossible beauty. And they walked toward the water because they always ended up at the water, some habit of orientation they'd developed without planning. And the East River was dark and moving, and the Manhattan skyline reflected in it like a version of itself that had been softened by the distance. She thought about coffee and rain, about the word wife said across a silent room, about the .02 margin that had held, about all the moments where the thread could have broken and didn't, not because of luck, not because of fate, but because two imperfect and difficult people had kept choosing again and again and again to stay in the room with each other. She thought about what Vivian had said in the kitchen on a Sunday morning. Sense keeps you alive. It doesn't keep you yours. She was hers. She had stayed hers. That was the thing she was most proud of. Not the gallery, not the work, not even the marriage, but the fact that she had moved through all of it and arrived here still recognizably herself. Flawed, too sharp, bad at being careful, good at being true. Dante stood beside her at the railing above the river, his shoulder against hers, easy and warm. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She watched the water. "That I'm glad I ran out of coffee that morning." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I was wearing my least favorite suit." She turned to look at him. "Was that intentional?" "No," he said. "But it makes a better story." She laughed. The real one, sudden and full, the one she'd never been able to control. He smiled. The real one. The one that took up his whole face and changed the entire architecture of it, and that she had been, she understood now, collecting for the better part of 2 years. Every instance of it stored somewhere below conscious thought, the way you store things you didn't know you were keeping. The river moved. The city made its noise. They stayed at the railing until the cold got into their bones, and then they walked back through the Brooklyn streets toward wherever they were going, which was the same direction they'd been going since a rainy Manhattan morning when she'd come around a corner too fast, and he'd been standing exactly where she was headed. Neither of them had planned it. Both of them had chosen it. That was the difference that mattered, the only one that ever did.